Ukraine's First Lady paid a visit to the U.S. this week and pleaded with Congress and the president for more aid and weapons. Now the U.S. will send 4 more high-mobility artillery rocket systems to Ukraine as part of the next military aid package. I guess we weren't using those anymore. That's the 16th package of equipment sent from U.S. stockpiles, and this comes as the Air Force is considering providing fighter jets to the war-torn country.
And it's pretty good timing. Last week, the House passed a whopping $839 billion defense package, as 180 Democrats and 149 Republicans joined together in the passage of a historically high military budget. According to Matt Taibbi, roll call revealed at least $58 billion was allotted for congressional additions, which includes money to respond to disasters and the war in Ukraine. But that's not all. Matt reports that billions of dollars of weapons the military did not seek were also stuffed in the bill. Journalist Matt Taibbi joins us to discuss further. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, Katie. How's it going? Robbie?
Good to see you.
Good. You?
Good to see you. Excellent. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned in your story that this was an underreported story. Why was it so underreported, do you think?
Well, so there was a unique provision this year in the defense bill, thanks to, I believe it was an amendment that was inserted by a Michigan Congresswoman named Melissa Slotkin that forced the Department of Defense to reveal what are called congressional additions, which is really, it's another word for earmark. Basically, it's essentially what it does is it forces the Pentagon to publish a list of things that Congress requested for the defense bill over and above what the president asked for. So that's kind of a new thing. And the only outlet to report on that report was Roll Call. A reporter named John Donnelly put it out. I did something on it this week. And apart from that, I don't think anybody's touched it.
And why do you think that is?
Well, this is just sort of par for the course for defense budget reporting. Every year we have almost every year we've been having these enormous historic increases, and there's really very few people on these stories unless they can find some kind of partisan angle on the defense bill. Like this year, for instance, it was Republicans who opposed a measure that would have purged the Defense Department of white supremacists. Years ago, it was Donald Trump refusing to invoke the name of John McCain, who after whom the bill had been named. Unless they can have an angle like that, nobody really likes to publish the story of both parties overwhelmingly voting for these massive defense increases, which have now happened under both Trump and Biden.
We're sending so much money and aid and weapons to Ukraine. It's kind of perfunctory at this point. They ask for more, we send more. We've talked to a lieutenant colonel on the show before who raised the possibility that we might actually be, there will come a point where we've depleted our own stockpiles, like our own ability to defend ourselves in the admittedly unlikely, but not impossible event of an attack. It seems to me that most Americans, voters, common people are not nearly as committed to helping out this endless war as the American government is in very pretty bipartisan fashion, although to the extent there's any opposition, it seems to me to be among a small number of Republicans who are otherwise derided as crazy by the media. What do you make of that dynamic?
Yeah, clearly, look, there have been already record amounts of money spent on weapons. We had the $33 billion addition that you reported on before, that the Biden administration sent. The Congress this time, of the $58 billion that the House added to the bill, which is an extraordinary number. I mean, think about that. That's almost the amount that we spent on the first year of the Iraq war invasion, for instance. The Senate this week also announced an even higher number than the House had approved. They went to $845 billion as opposed to $839 billion. And all they really had to do was say, most of this is for Ukraine, and that was it. They essentially ascribed all this to more money for Ukraine. So if you take that $33 billion and you add all the money that's now been added to the defense budget, as sort of essentially war funding for Ukraine, it's getting to be a pretty enormous number really quickly.
Right,
Are
and
you
an
surprised
enormous.
by the?
Go ahead.
Are you surprised by the media's appetite for funding the? Well, I would say for funding a proxy war or escalating a proxy war in Ukraine. Is this typical for the media to be so rah-rah war?
Well, absolutely. I think we had a brief moment in time between, say, 2008 and 2011 where there was a little bit of skepticism in terms of coverage of the Pentagon and defense spending. Obviously, during the Iraq war years, we saw this sharply escalating amount of spending for war funding, for Iraq, for expanding the garrisons in the Middle East. Then there were cuts in 2011 under Barack Obama, but then since then we've essentially seen the defense budget creep back up, and this is always reported as a positive, virtually always in the press, if it's reported at all. Again, most of the time, the really interesting thing about this from a media perspective is that there's just not a whole lot of coverage of where all this money's going. Nobody knows how it's being appropriated. Obviously, the Pentagon flunked its audit, which was another underreported story. And basically, you have to rely on outlets like Roll Call, which do a great job of following these votes. But that's really it. Compared to other types of spending, this gets very little coverage.
And we're told by the media constantly that this is, a uniquely savagely partisan time where, Republicans and Democrats can't even be in the same room with each other. Nothing can get done in Washington because there's so much acrimony and mutual distrust and dislike. And okay, maybe that's true on some issues. Doesn't seem to be the case on foreign policy, doesn't seem to be the case on military spending, where there's just tremendous, and really always has been, or at least in my lifetime, I guess, for tremendous bipartisan ideas about military spending and foreign policy that I think are out of sync with what people want. But in Washington, it's unanimity of approach, it's virtual unanimity of approach. Doesn't that totally fly in the face of the narrative we hear from the mainstream media that these are like these uniquely vicious times?
Absolutely. And again, and that's why I stress it's always so interesting to watch how the unanimity is downplayed, right? Like every year when these votes come out, there's extraordinary bipartisanship on defense spending. And also, by the way, on this new phenomenon of earmarks coming back. We saw this year, this $58 billion of congressional additions. It was both parties heavily indulging in these new types of appropriations. Well, not new types, but they're basically coming back. These adds to the budget by Congress. And instead of focusing on that, and we had members of Congress saying things like, this is the definition of a bipartisan bill, right? Mike Rogers from Alabama said that. Instead, when you watch this in the news, it tends to be, if there's any traffic at all, it tends to be about something like, the Republican caucus refusing to go for the amendment about white supremacy, the program to eliminate that. This bill, bank bailouts, the CARES Act, there was enormous unanimity about all sorts of things. But we stay away from those types of stories because it kind of defeats the narrative that they are complete adversaries about everything.
Good points. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Good to see you both.
Matt.
Katie, take care.
We'll have more Rising in just a minute.